Okay, ready? All right, good evening, everyone. Good. Hi. Good evening, everyone. I'm Mayor Ted Bettencourt, and again, it's great to have all of you here tonight. Sorry that we were slightly delayed. I wanted to thank our IT team and the great work of PAT. We just had to do some technical work, but we are ready to go, and I'm told that we are live on PAT and on Facebook. So I know we have a great crowd here, and I know there's going to be hundreds and hundreds of people watching through those different ways, watching it live. So again, great to have all of you here. I did want to mention, again, that we do have water. It can get hot in here. And then the bathrooms are over here to my right, the ladies' room and the gentleman's room. I never thought that we quite would be here having a meeting about earthquakes in Peabody. Certainly we all have had a rough go of it these last 18 months in different ways. We've all been personally affected, and sorry to say, and it's unfortunate that the earthquakes and the concerns brought by these earthquakes and these explosions have caused us some additional distress and concern. But these are very real. The earthquakes that are happening, what's been taking place in Peabody is very real, and we need to address it and find out what's taking place here. I first heard reports of the loud booms, explosions, back in February. I think that's when I first started hearing reports from different neighborhoods across the city. My sister lives off of Forest Street, and she was deeply affected by the ones that in February and each one that is taking place along the way. And I know it seems to be a lot of them are in the Emerson Park, Center School, Forest Street area. However, there have been reports in other neighborhoods as well. I think all of us in this area has felt them, and it has affected us. And I know all of you have been deeply affected by what's taking place. It's very unsettling, very concerning, your homes, your families. And certainly it's something that not only affects all of you that have been affected directly, but everybody. It's unsettling for everybody in our city and everybody regionally. But it's great to have all of you here so we can really try to dig into this and find out what's taking place. So when we first started getting reports of these loud booms, explosions, we did our own internal investigation. We had our police department, and our police chief, Tom Griffin, is here. We had our fire department, and our fire chief, Joe Daly, is here. They conducted their investigations. We had dogs out reviewing the area, combing the area, looking for signs of explosive material. We had drones out in the area that we thought where these booms and explosions were taking place. Department of Public Works, we have our Director of Engineering, Bob Langley, here, as well as our engineer, Jim Nicholas. We had assistance from our DPW director and the department trying to help ascertain what was taking place here. We reached out to our utilities in the area, National Grid being first and foremost. I've spoken a great deal with Brandon Barker, who is our representative, and keeping him in the loop and finding out if there's been any issues with National Grid, and we're being told that there is not. We reached out to a number of the companies, businesses in this area, I think you all know them, to try to find out if there's some issues taking place at their facilities, any sort of blasting, any sort of concerns over in their businesses, and unable to try to find out anything from them that was helpful. Also looking at construction projects that have been taking place in the city, trying to find out if that's been a factor in these booms and explosions. We reached out to Aggregate Industries and have been in contact with our Peabody Fire Department. Aggregate Industries is a quarry that operates on Roosevelt Street over in the western part of the city, over on the line of Middleton. And the Peabody Fire Department has reported to us that their blasting that they do every year is in the same frequency and the same scope as it's always been. They do blasting sporadically on Thursdays during spring and summer, and it's monitored. Every blast is monitored by our fire department, and they told us that there's been no change in what they've been doing for years now. So it really left us at a loss as to what was taking place here. We couldn't pinpoint exactly what the issues were, but it was very real, and we needed to try to dig deeper. According to the United States Geological Survey, we've had 3 recorded earthquakes. The first one was on July 25th. It was a 1.4 magnitude. The second one was on August 4th. It was a 1.2 magnitude. And the third one was last week. August 18th was a 1.3 magnitude. Understandably, as I said, these have caused a great deal of concern for all of you. I've heard great reports, a great number of reports of shaken houses, things falling off the walls, real effects from these earthquakes. And again, these are very real. We have an emergency management team here in the City of Peabody. We have a citywide emergency preparedness plan that encompasses really any city emergency, running from natural disasters to bioterrorism, to chemical spills, and certainly COVID, which we've all been dealing with. The emergency management director for our city, as it is in most communities, is our fire chief, Joe Daly. Also members of that team is our police chief, Tom Griffin, our health director, Sharon Cameron, and our IT officials, Frank Guillen in the back, Peter Benavides, and some of their support staff, and myself. And certainly I can say that none of us are experts in any way, near experts in earthquakes. This was certainly something new to all of us, as I'm sure it's been new to many of you. What we needed to do was to reach out to our state officials, our federal officials, our experts that can find out for us what's going on. We needed guidance, we needed information, and we needed support. We've been able to do that, and I wanted to recognize and thank our state legislators who helped in connecting us to the people that we needed to. Senator Joan Lovely is here. Our state representatives Tom Walsh and Sally Currens are both here. They were very helpful in getting us the information we needed in order to make these important contacts. We have had numerous meetings in person, Zoom meetings, over the phone, with representatives from the United States Geological Survey. We've had representatives from the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency. We do have representatives today from MEMA. It's known as the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency. Mr. James Mannion is the Eastern Mass Regional Manager. Where's Mr. Mannion? Back in the back. Thank you for being here, as well as Heather Tetch, who is the Essex County representative from MEMA. I appreciate you both being here today, and they're certainly available to answer questions when we get into that part of the event. During those meetings and discussions, it was very eye-opening to me, and the person who kind of came to the forefront for us, the person that was most knowledgeable about earthquakes in not only Essex County, in Massachusetts and in New England, is Dr. John Ebel. He is the professor at Boston College for geophysics, a consultant, and someone who literally wrote the book on New England earthquakes. Quite a read. I've been reading a great deal about different communities across New England that have dealt with, looks like, similar natural phenomenon that we're dealing with. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ebel in a moment, but really, this is an opportunity for us to try to get a handle on what's taking place here. I've been very shy to go on camera. We've had a number of media outlets reach out because, quite frankly, I'm just learning and being a part of trying to do my due diligence to find out what's taking place here. But I really wanted the experts, the people who know what these earthquakes mean to our community and what's happening, to be the ones that speak to all of us. I'm going to introduce Mr. John Ebel. Based on what he's been able to provide and our other state officials, that these booms and explosions are attributed to natural phenomenon and are attributed to seismic activity. But there's a lot of questions, a lot of information that needs to be provided to all of us. About Dr. Ebel, he has been a professor of Earth and Environmental Sciences at Boston College for over 30 years and is the former director of Boston College's Western Observatory, a seismic research facility dedicated to detect, locate, catalog, and study all earthquakes that occur in New England and its vicinity. He holds a BA in physics from Harvard University and a PhD in geophysics from the California Institute of Technology. He has published more than 80 papers and reports on earthquakes in New England and around the world. Additionally, he has been a consultant on seismic activity for over 20 years, or over 20 major engineering projects such as highway bridges, dams, and other critical structures in the United States and across the world, actually. A couple quick things before I go over to turn it over to Dr. Ebel. during his presentation, we do have laminated cards here that have all the contact information for city officials, for state officials, for utilities, all the contact information, phone numbers, email address that we're going to provide to everybody here, as well as other people that aren't able to make it today. But I want to make sure everybody leaves with one. We'll be passing those out during the presentation. And I also wanted to thank and recognize our city council members who are here, our school committee members. I think really all of them are here. This has been something that has been a concern of all of ours, and it's great to have our state legislators, our city leaders, and our city departments here. We're here to answer questions, try to provide some information as best we can, but I really want to turn it over to the experts. So Dr. John Ebel, please come on up.
My thanks to Mayor Bettencourt for the invitation to talk to you, and I'm pleased to see so many people here. Let me start by asking a question. How many of you have felt or heard at least one of these events? Whoa, and you at home who are watching, you can raise your hands too. I might not see you, but you can participate. So most of you here. Well, that's interesting because, people live in New England, live in the Boston area, for example, and they'll say to me, well, I've never felt an earthquake. We don't have earthquakes here. But in fact, we do have earthquakes here, enough that I could actually write a book about the earthquakes in this region, and it's filled with chapters on earthquake damage, and there's even one that had a tsunami, and small earthquakes and large earthquakes. What I want to do today is to talk about a specific kind of earthquake series that we've observed several times. It's not the normal way that earthquakes occur, but we've observed it a number of times, and it's what we call an earthquake swarm. And to begin, what I want to do is explain to you what an earthquake is, because when we use the term earthquake, we have different concepts of what an earthquake is, but there's some very specific ideas to a seismologist that fall under the definition of an earthquake. So I want to run through this with you very quickly right now. So if we have the earth, we have rock in the earth, and that rock is under pressure, and the pressure is coming from the movement of the plates. So there are a couple arrows here showing you pressure, and the pressure is greater in one direction than other directions because, of course, that's the direction that the plate is moving. And that pressure acts like a vice. It squeezes the rock, squeezes the rock, squeezes the rock until the rock breaks. And when the rock breaks, it breaks to relieve that pressure. And that break is what happens in the earth when an earthquake initiates. Now, I'm showing right here a star that shows where the rock first breaks. And when the rock breaks, it forms a crack. Just like a brick in the vise, it forms a crack, and that crack grows, and that crack has a name. We obviously call that a fault. The crack starts somewhere in the earth that we call the earthquake focus. If you project that focus up to the surface of the earth, we call that the epicenter of the earthquake. But if you're standing at the epicenter of the earthquake, you don't know whether that earthquake is say 1 meter below you, 1 kilometer below you, or maybe 100 kilometers below you. It might be 100 miles below you for all you know. Now, when the rock breaks, it slides, and that sliding releases vibrational waves. And those vibrational waves are what you feel as earthquake shaking. Furthermore, when the vibrational waves get to the surface of the earth, they can couple into sound waves in the air. And so if you think you heard an earthquake but you didn't feel it, that makes perfect sense, because that's the seismic waves coming up to the surface and converting into sound waves. And so you are hearing sound waves. You are indeed hearing the earthquake. Now, the crack starts, as I said, at the focus. And here's the epicenter. And the final crack is the fault. Now, one of the things that you must understand right now is after the earthquake, there is definitely a crack there. There is definitely a fault. However, There does not need to be a fault there before the earthquake. Some earthquakes occur on old faults, but some earthquakes actually are creating brand new faults. So when I look at the earth, I don't just say, well, where's the nearest fault? Because that tells me about the earthquakes, because it doesn't. It might be brand new cracks that are forming that do not have anything to do with the old faults that are in the rock. And that's why when people call me up at Weston Observatory and say, well, where's the nearest fault to my house? I say, well, why are you asking? You're not going to learn anything about earthquake activity when you know where the faults are. Okay, so I'm going to talk about an earthquake swarm, but I am not going to begin by talking about the swarm here in Peabody. I'm going to talk about a swarm that took place in 2015 in Plainfield, Connecticut. And I want you to look at this headline. Instead of Connecticut, you could put Peabody there, and it would be exactly the same story. Here's another headline. Again, you could take the word Connecticut and you could put Peabody in, and it would be exactly the same thing as you folks are curious about. So, what happened at Plainfield? Well, here's a map of the earthquakes to January 2015, when the Maine swarm of earthquakes started in Plainfield. And the arrow is pointing to a place that has no symbols on it. There had been no prior earthquake activity there, except for a couple events in late 2014 that I'll mention in a second. So, as a seismologist, I wasn't looking at Plainfield and saying, oh, well, that's a place where I would expect an earthquake. So here's what happened. There was an event on October 13th, 2014 that no one even felt, but we detected it with our seismic stations. There was another event in November 2014, two events actually on that day, again, too small to be felt. But they did start feeling earthquakes in January 8th. You can see there was a 2.0. January 12th, there was a 3.1. The people were feeling lots of earthquakes, so they got upset. And just as I'm talking here, my colleague, Alan Kafka, went down to a town meeting in Plainfield and talked to the people there about what was going on. At that time, I had a student who was able to actually go out and put out some portable seismic instruments. So we were able to record very, very small earthquake activity from there. We left the instruments out until August of 2015, although the last earthquake we detected was a very, very tiny one. No one felt it in July of 2015. We detected with our portable instrument more than 180 very, very tiny earthquakes. We call them micro-earthquakes. Now, of those, only maybe a couple dozen were heard or felt, just the way you were feeling them. So it's possible that there are even more earthquakes occurring under Peabody, even today, that no one is feeling because they're too small. We don't know because we don't have any portable seismic instruments in the area. Now, you'll notice that there's an arrow here on this map, and it shows the location of where these earthquakes were in Plainfield. And there are some lines and changes in colors, and those dark lines are faults. So if we focus in there, the head of the arrow shows where these earthquakes were occurring, and they're right near actually a pretty major fault system that's been mapped in Connecticut. However, to a seismologist, having an epicenter and having a fault doesn't mean that those earthquakes are on that fault. We want to see which way the earthquakes are lining up. So here is a view of the area, and what you can see is the earthquakes, if anything, are showing an west-northwest, east-southeast trend, exactly perpendicular to the fault. So these earthquakes don't seem to be occurring on the fault. However, what I want you to do is to look in the center, and you'll notice these earthquakes are surrounding a kind of a bare feature where there are almost no trees. That's an old quarry that had been abandoned about 5 years before these earthquakes were occurring. And as near as we can tell, these earthquakes were occurring very, very close to the quarry, and some of them perhaps even under the quarry. People were hearing booms. They felt the largest earthquakes, But mostly they were just hearing these noises, and they would write down the times and the dates and send them to me, and we would check our records, and sure enough, we had one here, we had one there. And then some of the events that we detected with our portable seismic instruments, no one reported. So we could actually detect, with instruments close enough, events that were too small to be felt. So we knew that there was an earthquake swarm going on. I want to focus now on another earthquake swarm that took place in the year 2011. This one occurred in the state of Maine, and you can see the arrow there pointing to the area where these earthquakes took place. Now, this was a much different swarm. Instead of 180 events, we only recorded 21 events. But they were spread out over a period of about 2 weeks. The largest event was only 1.7, just a little bit larger than the events that you folks have experienced so far here in Peabody. We did manage to get a couple portable instruments out, so we recorded some of the events that were too small to be heard and be felt. Interesting. What did people describe the sounds of the earthquakes like? Gunshots, shotgun blasts, explosions. And talking to Mayor Bettencourt before I came out here, same descriptions that have been coming from you folks here into the mayor's office. We did detect 8 micro-earthquakes that were actually too small to be located in this area, but we know that they were coming from the same general areas where the larger events were. There's an arrow here that's pointing to the epicentral area, and in this case, there were no faults around where these earthquakes were occurring. So in this case, it looks like probably these were brand new cracks forming in the earth. They weren't earthquakes occurring on an old fault. In fact, they were occurring in the middle of a granite pluton. The third swarm I wanted to talk about is a swarm of earthquakes that happened in Bar Harbor, Maine in 2006 and into 2007. And the top plot here shows time starting on September 20th, 2006, going into early 2007. And the bars show when earthquakes occurred that we detected with our seismic instruments in that area. And the vertical axis shows magnitude. In this particular case, there was an earthquake that got up to magnitude 4.1. Now, damage starts at magnitude 5. So 4.1 was not damaging. There was actually a couple falls of rock, a very unstable rock in Acadia National Park. But other than that, there was no damage. But on the other hand, the 4.1 was felt over the entire state, southern part of the state of Maine. So that was a much more significant earthquake. And it occurred, a couple weeks after the swarm started. So sometimes you get these swarms, and they're like the previous one I showed you, where 1.7 is the biggest earthquake, and then it dies away and nothing else happens. Sometimes you get larger events in the swarms. Not usually, but it can happen. Once again, there were no previously known earthquakes from this area. So it was a surprise to the seismologists. Surprise in the sense that, well, it wasn't a place that we were watching for earthquakes. Here's a map. It's a geologic map. You can see the circular area shows the rocks of Acadia National Park, Mount Desert Island. There's a dashed line that's offshore. That's where we think the fault was that was having these earthquakes. And so whether there's a fault out there or not, I don't know. And the lobsters haven't told us whether or not there are earthquakes there. But in this case, once again, we have a very ambiguous relationship of the earthquakes to the faults in the area. I'm only going to say a word about the Moodus, Connecticut area. Have any of you heard of Moodus? Anyone here? Do you know what the word Moodus means? It's an Indian word. It means place of noises. I came to Western Observatory at the end of 1980. In 1981, we picked up a couple little events from the Moodus area. And then we picked up a pretty energetic swarm with over 100 events in 1981. another swarm in 1982, another swarm in 1986, and another swarm in 1987. And the largest earthquakes were only in the magnitude roughly 3 range, so well below the threshold of damage. But people were hearing things. People were hearing the booms. They were literally hearing the Moodus noises. I went down to Moodus to put out a portable seismic instrument. I was standing there. I had the instrument all set up. I hadn't turned it on yet. Boom. I heard one of the noises. Oh, I didn't have the instrument on. And then we did run the instrument, and we did record some of the small earthquakes that were there. We learned that earthquakes down to about magnitude 1 were being felt, and earthquakes down to around magnitude 0 were being heard, and we were actually recording even smaller earthquakes. We were recording earthquakes down to magnitude -2, which is so small that unless you have a seismic instrument right over the epicenter, you're not going to detect it. My book that the mayor very kindly mentioned does have a whole chapter on the Moodus noises if you want to know more about them. But this is an example where you had 4 earthquake swarms take place over a period of a decade, each swarm having tends to over 100 events. So what you are experiencing here in the city of Peabody is not an everyday occurrence, but it's not that unusual. And so when I look at what has been reported and what we have detected seismically so far, I say, well, looks like an earthquake swarm to me. How long it's going to last, I can't say. Could there be larger events? I can't say too. But I'll show you a little bit of information about that in a second. Here's the 1.3 event that occurred just last week. And this is from the Did You Feel It website from the U.S. Geological Survey. And you'll notice that there are 26 reports coming from Peabody. Now, these data are accumulated by zip code. So, you know, whether you live in the eastern part of the city or the western part of the city or the central part of the city, it's all going to show up as part of that 26. But you notice that's a report from Salem and a report from Danvers and a report from Linfield. I think that those are probably all real reports. Here's the event from beginning of August 4th. That one was felt more noticeably. At least more people reported it. So you have 92 reports from Peabody and then a number of different towns where the event was reported, both east, you notice Gloucester and Westland and places like that. So I'm going to show my last slide, which is entitled, What Might Happen in the Future in Peabody? Well, here are the possibilities. Maybe no more events. Maybe we're done. All of these swarms have ended that I talked about in other parts of the region. Maybe this swarm has ended too. I don't know. Next possibility is that there might be some more of these small events. Perhaps none bigger than 1.3, 1.4, 1.5, maybe like the one swarm up in Maine up to 1.7. Maybe a larger event, maybe a 2 to 3, below the threshold for damage, but larger than what's been seen so far. And some statistics I put together suggest that there's probably about a 5% chance of that happening. Now, how about a big earthquake? How about one that literally can cause damage? Magnitude 5, 5.5, 6. We don't really know what the chances are of that earthquake being centered here. But what I can say is from the statistics that I have done so far, it's certainly much, much less than 1%. There is a chance, but the chances are small. And I can't really put a good number on it because I don't have enough data to be able to put a good number on that. So that ends the formal remarks I was going to make. I'm sure that at least some of you have questions, and so we have a microphone in the back. Is that correct? We're going to use that microphone for questions? Yeah, so we have a microphone in the back for questions, and if you would like to just go back and line up, you are certainly welcome to ask any questions that you want about the earthquakes. And please, when you ask the question, speak into the microphone so that those who have tuned in from home can listen to the question.
I was wondering if there's more of a chance of a larger earthquake in Peabody than other communities that haven't experienced these minor earthquakes.
I can't really say. And the reason why I can't really say is because when we've looked at where the larger earthquakes have occurred here in the region over the last, say, few hundred years, as well as the earthquakes that have occurred recently, sometimes the earthquakes occur where there have been small earthquakes in the past, and sometimes they occur just in a very surprising place out of the blue. So my opinion, and what I will say here in public, is that I think an earthquake that's strong enough to potentially be damaging could be centered anywhere in the region. And I'm talking about the New England region, the northeastern states, down in New York State, New Jersey, et cetera.
Hey, Doctor, thanks again for coming tonight. Could you tell us more about the Did You Feel It website? Because I assume that if somebody felt something in Peabody and put the information into the website, it would probably help you out, just like you're helping us out tonight.
Yes, it's, if you just Google Did You Feel It, or Did You Feel It USGS, or U.S. Geological Survey, they have a questionnaire. And the questionnaire, you know, where are you living, what did you feel, what did you hear, and they have a bunch of questions. And based on those questions, they assign what they call a felt intensity of the earthquake. If you go on that website and there was an earthquake reported, you can put in your report. And if you didn't feel it, you can actually go in and say, no, I didn't feel it. And that's useful information for us also. If you felt something and there was no report of an earthquake, you can still go in and put the Did You Feel It information into the computer. And then those get accumulated also, because sometimes what happens is there's no earthquake reported, but people reported, did you feel it? And then a seismologist like myself goes back, looks at the seismograms and say, oh yeah, there is a little something there. Let me do it up and try locating it. And sometimes we do find that there's an earthquake. So I showed you the two earthquakes. The first earthquake that was reported was from July 25th. And I don't know if anyone here felt it or heard it, but there are no Did You Feel It reports on the USGS website for that earthquake. And so you can even go in today and enter felt reports for that earthquake. And that would be helpful to me, actually.
Thank you for your presentation, Dr. Ebel. Very well done. We live up in West Peabody, and it was of particular interest to me to see mention of a quarry in Connecticut. We live probably less than a mile from the bituminous quarry up in West Peabody. And in July, in August, in the evening, at night, we've heard noises, thinking that they were gunshots. In fact, in one instance, I personally called the police department and indicated, gee, we thought we heard gunshots in the neighborhood. So the question is this. I understand what you're saying about swarms. Is it possible, and I'm sure it's possible, that there could be some correlation between the activity at the quarry, for instance, dynamiting and so forth, because we feel it in our home. And what are we, probably 6 or 7 miles maybe from here? So could there be some effect of that activity on what you're talking about with regard to swarms and earthquakes? And I suppose I won't speculate to say if we're closer than, it could be much more imminent, but I'd like to just kind of just pose that out in general to you for your remarks on that.
That's an interesting question, and one that I'm interested in both to try to help you folks out who are residents here in Peabody, but actually a scientific question as well. And it's a hard question to answer, and let me explain why. There are dozens and dozens of quarries here in the greater Boston area. Many of them blast. They might blast, once a week, they might blast once a month, they might blast a few times a year. And of course, we have abandoned quarries too. We do not locate earthquakes near quarries as a general rule. We had in Pennsylvania, there was an abandoned quarry that filled up with water. And right after the water level reached kind of the highest level that it could, they had a swarm of earthquakes, including a magnitude 4.7 that was actually, right at the threshold of damage. But when I look at the quarries here in New England, I see no earthquake activity there. But we did see the relationship down in the Plainfield, Connecticut area. So is there a chance that these earthquakes are related to the quarry? Perhaps. However, if they're related to the quarry, I would not expect the events to be felt and heard, say, here in the center of Peabody, but not being heard and felt near the quarry. So that's got me kind of confused because, the earthquakes should be occurring within, say, a mile or so of the quarry, if they're related to the quarry itself, at least with our current understanding of how a quarry could induce earthquakes. So the locations of where people are hearing and feeling these things is actually a very important data point for me.
Hi. My question was, ever since I was young, I always heard that the East Coast had earthquake faults. We were like California on the West Coast. Is there any truth to that, or is that just an urban myth?
Read my book. But I do have a more complete answer to your question. And my more complete answer to the question is the following. I did my PhD at Caltech in Pasadena, California, a seismological laboratory. For instance, when I started as a graduate student, I met one of the emeritus faculty there by the name of Charles Richter. So, I cut my teeth on California earthquakes. I came here to New England, started studying the earthquakes, and I was saying, well, they remind me of the earthquakes in California. Lots of little earthquakes, occasional big earthquakes, very occasional damaging earthquake. The difference between New England and California is actually just the rate at which the earthquakes occur. What they record in 1 year of earthquake activity in California, you have to wait 100 years to record the same number of earthquakes here. So we do have earthquakes here. They occur regularly. I've been monitoring earthquakes for 40 years here. Every year we've had earthquakes. Every year I've dealt with felt earthquakes and interesting earthquakes. But what I can tell you is the rate of earthquakes is a lot lower here, and that means the chances of a strong earthquake, a damaging earthquake here in New England are about 100 times less in California. And so something that's, if you're shaking the rock, say you're shaking it this way, something that's above the ground will amplify the ground shaking, and that's why buildings tend to take damage. A pipe that is buried in the ground shakes with the ground, so it's much harder for ground shaking to break underground utilities than it is to break things above the ground. So, yeah, you could have things break, especially if you have old pipes that are weak and, they get shaken and they'll break for other reasons because, the water is going to be sloshing around in the water pipes or the sewers and all that. But I would not worry so much about the underground facilities as much as I would worry about the facilities above ground. We have a lady back up here who has trouble walking, and so maybe we can somehow get her to ask a question. And then, ma'am, we'll take you next.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, is there any preparation that we can do to, in case something bad happens? I mean, like, what happens if there was a major earthquake, which could happen, the 1%? Is there any way we could prepare for that, and what do we do if that happens?
Excellent question. Let me give you a little bit of information about earthquake safety. I think you can take the microphone back. Let me give you a little bit of information about earthquake safety. People are hurt or killed in earthquakes by things falling on them. So the first thing you want to do is to look around if you feel earthquake shaking and say, well, what might fall on me? Well, I don't want to be under the chandelier, for example. The safest thing you can do is to get under a piece of furniture. So I'm going to be under this podium as much as I can, using it to protect me. If you can get under a table, that's great, or under a desk, that's great. People say, well, maybe I should run outside. That might seem to be a smart thing, but let me tell you why that might not be the best thing to do. Most of us live in wood frame houses. If you take a wood frame house and you shake it, that wood will bend and it won't break unless it's got, like, you know, dry rot or some sort of damage to it. So most of our houses are going to be fine in an earthquake. However, things that are made of brick, made of very stiff materials, they don't want to bend, they tend to break. What's a stiff material that pretty much every New England house has? It's chimney. So if you go running out and you have a chimney and the bricks are breaking off the chimney and falling down, they could hit you on the head and you could be running into danger if you run outside. So you're actually better off to think, to get yourself safe. If you don't have like something like this to protect you, then you just are supposed to, what they call it, say, duck, cover, and hold. Just get down into a crouched position and cover your head. And that's really what you do. We have seismic provisions and have had them since 1975 in our building codes. So a building of this vintage would not be built to earthquake standards, but any building that's been built since 1975, any school, for example, any fire station, for example, any commercial building, for example, has to be built to those earthquake standards. Houses are generally exempt, but as I explained, wood frame houses tend to do pretty well. So, except for the chimney, I would not expect too much damage. And you're going to get cracked plaster and things like that. But unless you have a bad foundation, the building will stay standing. Ma'am, please.
Thank you, Dr. Ebel. Great presentation. My question is along the line of this lovely lady. In case we were to experience a much stronger earthquake, would you recommend that the city share earthquake or disaster preparedness with the constituents, especially for our seniors who may not have access to internet to do research to find out what they should do, where they should shelter in their home, and in case of a damaging earthquake, where in the city can they seek shelter? And in case of family separation too, what is the plan? Something like a pamphlet or flyer where they can display on their refrigerator just to have that message ready just in case.
That's an important question, but I'm actually not the best person to answer that question. The best person, or people, I should say, to answer a question like that are actually those who are involved in emergency management, because that is exactly what people who do emergency management are supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be getting information out to citizens like you, to people who are in nursing homes, to people who are in schools, and explain to them how they need to take earthquakes into their considerations for safety. You know, children in schools do fire drills. Well, they should do earthquake drills too, for example. So we have the emergency management chief here for Peabody here. We have members of the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency. So those are the agencies that the resident should be dealing with when they're trying to find out what kind of planning do we have in Peabody for earthquakes, what could be done, what should the citizens do. Those are really questions for them. Okay.
That's an excellent question. And I think based on the information we're being provided today, we've had discussions with the MEMA, the Massachusetts DEP. I think we can put a great deal of information together, specifically spelling out if there was such an earthquake that rise to the level of severe damage. We can put that information together, get a pamphlet out. I can tell you that our emergency shelters, our Peabody High School, the middle school, the senior center, and even the North Shore Mall we've been able to utilize at times. So if something were to happen, those would be the locations we would look to depending on where the damage was, where the actual problem was. Those would be locations we have used in the past and we would use for this. But I think that's an excellent question, excellent suggestion. We did give phone numbers today that we wanted to get out in the short term, but I think more information needs to be provided. And I wanted to use this forum as a springboard to get that information out, and I think we can get something out to the residents to give you more specifics as to what we would do or what we would recommend in the case of a real damaging earthquake.
So I'd just like to add one thing to that, Mayor. Every year, there's something called the Great American Shakeout that happens. I left my phone up there, so I can't Google the date of it when it is this year, but it's a national event where there's one day, there's one time where you can, every community can educate the public, and it's great for kids in schools. It really educates them on what to do if they do feel an earthquake. And just like Dr. Ebel was saying, you go under a table, you go under a desk or something like that. But that might be something that maybe the community wants to do this year, given the recent events going on. So I'll Google that date and let you know, Mayor and Chief. Thank you.
Let me see if I can find it
October
here.
21st. Somebody just Googled it behind me. So
Okay, they beat me. Another
Hi.
question.
Yes, Doctor. Great presentation. Thank you very much. I think one of the disturbing things about these earthquakes is that they were so small we couldn't tell what they were. I'm wondering, again, when you try to look online, earthquake reporting is really geared towards ones that are going to create a lot of damage, and these ones obviously really didn't. I'm wondering, as you know, during the Haitian earthquake, recent Haitian earthquake, they were really reliant on a lot of essentially hobby seismographs, and they were just linked to the internet. Since you can't tell quite immediately what's happening with these small quakes, is there a data gap that we can easily fill? What would having distributed seismographs, which are really cheap now, actually fill in as far as your data in emergency preparedness?
Very interesting question. It would help a lot, especially if the seismographic system had a good timing system on it, because timing is critical. We need to know time at least to 1/100th of a second on our seismographs, and sometimes even to finer time than that. There is a commercial seismographic system called the Raspberry Shake, which is, I don't know, about $1,000, I think. And the 500? And the data goes down to, actually, it goes down to a place in Panama, but we can get access to those data. In fact, my colleague at Weston Observatory, Alan Kafka, has been working with that. But if there were Raspberry Shake instruments that were recording these things, we could work with those data, and that would be very interesting. So yes, citizens can actually get involved in earthquake monitoring, just as, there are amateur astronomers out there, and every now and then they make a discovery before the scientists do. If you go on the Weston Observatory website, if you just Google Weston Observatory and go to the website, you can find out about the Raspberry Shake systems.
Okay, I have a question about I don't know, you or other people has a lot of report hearing banging sound from different cities, like Salem, Denver, and other area. Then why then use only pointing Peabody? That is I'm kind of wondering, if they don't know location, how can they only pointing Peabody?
Well, the reason why they're pointing to Peabody is because if you look, one of the zip codes in Salem had 3 reports. One of the zip codes in Lynn had 2 reports. Another Lynn zip code had 1 report. Peabody has 92 reports. So you must be closest to the epicenter. Seismic waves are like waves in the water. If you go out to a pond on a very still day where it's just absolutely flat, you toss a pebble in, you can see the waves spreading out. They get smaller and smaller and harder to see. Same thing for the earthquakes. The waves are strongest right at the hypocenter, and they're spreading out, getting weaker and weaker. So yes, people in towns surrounding Peabody are hearing these noises or perhaps feeling them. But you folks are right on top of the epicenters, and so that's why you're the focus of my interest and why so many of you are experiencing these earthquakes.
Yeah, another question is, can you tell the difference of the banging sound under the ocean or under the ground by the sound?
Well, if it's in the rock under the ocean, it's an earthquake. It's just like an earthquake under the land, because 3 miles or 4 miles down, the rock doesn't care whether there's water on it or trees or desert. It doesn't really care at all. So as the seismic waves come up, they won't convert to the same kind of sound waves in air because, of course, under an ocean, you have water atop. So from a seismologist's point of view, the waves look just like seismic waves, but you would experience them somewhat differently. People on the ocean actually do feel and hear earthquakes just as we do on land.
Okay. Because as a Peabody citizen, I feel fear, even the small earthquake, because without knowing it, you might damage in your house. So, and another thing is, I'm not happy about it. They pointing Peabody. That's why I'm asking this question. All right, thank you.
Let me just say that one of the ways that you folks could help me out, now we know about these 3 earthquakes that we were able to locate seismically, but if you can give me other dates and times and be as specific as you can on when you thought you heard an earthquake, I would like to know that, because I can go back into our seismic records for our closest seismic stations and do some very careful analyses of them, filtering and things like that, to see if I can't find very, very small earthquake signals that we would just miss with our normal just looking at the records. So I would be very much interested in having people get me that information. My email address is just my last name, Ebel, E-B-E-L. Let me go back to the first slide here. I think if I do this, it'll get me there. Yeah. Ebel@bc.edu. BC stands obviously for Boston College. So ebel@bc.edu. And if you just email me dates and times when you think you felt events, I can go look at those and look at those days and times on our seismic records and see if I see anything. Ma'am.
This question's actually for Mayor Bettencourt. In the case of an emergency, what can we do with our pets? Where can we go with them?
Great question. Pets are a part of our family, certainly. Let us come up with a good answer on that and have that a part of the pamphlet. But absolutely, we have to account for our pets. Let us work on that. Thank you. I did want to mention in my earlier remarks, too, we have been in touch with the American Red Cross. Certainly, they would be a key figure, key organization if something were to happen here in the city. And the chief just mentioned that the American Red Cross does provide shelter for families with pets. So that would be a factor as well. But that's a great question. Let me get some information further for you.
Thanks for being here, Doctor. One of the things that I was wondering about is, in light of the swarm of earthquakes, in any of the other instances, were there any possibilities or occurrences of sinkholes that developed because of the earthquake activity?
The answer is no. We have not seen sinkholes associated with any earthquakes. And we don't really have the right geology here for sinkholes. Sinkholes form in places, central part of the country. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. Sinkholes can form there. Any place where you have limestone, because the limestone can be eroded by water. We actually have the opposite here. There have been places where we've had in quarries, they'll take off a little bit of rock and they get what they call a rock pop-up. And that's because of the pressure, the compressive pressure being so large. Now, I have not heard of any rock pop-ups in quarries here in Peabody, although I do know that there have been rock pop-ups here in the the area north of Boston reported like, 30 and 40 years ago. And that's probably just telling us that the rock is under a lot of pressure and it's very easy to crack.
Yeah, hi. Thank you very much. I live in an area that's, I'm told, is a landfill just right around the corner. And what I heard were 3 bangs. So your presentation tonight kind of explained that to me. But does this mean that the sound waves basically are traveling at different rates through the ground, depending on whether it's landfill, whether it's rock, whether it's sand, something else? Is that why I'm only hearing the bangs and not the shaking?
I'm smiling because you're very perceptive. You have just described another line of my research, looking at how seismic waves go through different materials and whether it's faster or slower. So that is correct, and I commend you for that deduction. However, the reason why you're hearing them and not feeling them is very simple. The sound waves that come up from the earth and convert into sounds that we can hear are of the order of 20 hertz, 50 hertz, 100 hertz or higher in what we call the audible or acoustic range. A lot of earthquake shaking actually is at lower frequencies than that. So you don't hear it, but you can feel it. These earthquakes are so very small that it's very difficult to feel them, but the sound waves are much more audible to us. And in fact, the last earthquake, which occurred at 3:30 in the afternoon, we just have so much what we call cultural noise, vehicles going by and things like that, buildings shake and whatever. We may not notice the vibrations, but we tend to hear the sound because we're more attuned to sound than we are to vibrations. Animals, like dogs and cats, are more in contact with the ground. Oftentimes, I think they react to the vibrations as much as to the sound.
I see. And then the other question I had was, the first one was a 1.4, then it went to 1.2, then back up 1.3. Is there any sort of pattern to this? Like, as the numbers get lower, will that mean, get to the micro point and we'll never hear it again, or at least for next time there's a swarm? Or if we get a 1.4, 1.6, 1.8, are we looking at, maybe this is the time to run for the hills?
Boy, I would love if there was a pattern. Because if there was a pattern, I could use it to predict earthquakes. And if I were able to predict earthquakes, I would be rich and famous. And I'm not rich, and I'm only a little bit famous. So
well, you're famous in our book.
But no, there just is no pattern. So okay. I just look at the numbers and I say, okay, well, yeah, that one was 1.2.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ebel, for being here today, and to the mayor and his staff for having you here and explaining all this. I'm an engineer in the defense industry, and I use granite tables to isolate my instruments and equipment from building vibrations and all of that. Since New England has such a deep bedrock and granite in the area, could that also be slightly isolating some of these earthquakes, or to the point that they're small enough that we don't feel them?
I don't know whether it isolates them or not. At Weston Observatory, we also have our seismic piers built right on the bedrock for exactly that same reason, because we don't want the vibrations of the buildings. So the piers all have damping material and are disconnected from the floor of the building. I think that the granite and the other hard rocks that we have, what we do know is it's under very high pressure. And you take rock under very high pressure and let it sit for, say, a million years, and it just might crack here, there, or somewhere else. We call that static fatigue. You may have heard that term in your work. Yep. And so I think that's what's happening. I think the rock has just been sitting here under high pressure for, we've been drifting away from Europe and Africa for more than 150 million years, and just that pressure every now and then causes a place in the rock to crack, and that's what we get as the earthquakes. Most of the times it's small cracks, and so we get small earthquakes like you've experienced here. Sometimes they're a little bit larger cracks, and sometimes it's a really big crack, and that's when we all have to worry.
Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Ebel. Thank you for joining us tonight. We heard a question earlier about a quarry being present here in Peabody, and you responded to that you didn't think that had any impact on what we're feeling, because the epicenter of these earthquakes was a little further away than a mile. Recently, we did construct a middle school in which we did a considerable amount of blasting of granite and other rock so that we could put a foundation in and build that school. So the first part of my question is, do you think that may have had any impact on what we're feeling over the last 6 or 8 months?
I guess I'm going to answer that question with the question back to you. How much rock was removed? You know, for instance, what thickness of rock was removed?
I can't answer that, but I can tell you that when I saw the plans for the building, there was a considerable amount of rock that needed to be removed, and that there was blasting that was required in order to remove it. So
that's a very common thing that happens here. You know, when they're putting up big buildings. Weston Observatory is in the town of Weston near 128. They put in a number of buildings about 10 or 15 years ago just on the east side of 128 there, and they were blasting every day, and I was feeling those, you know, quite noticeably in my office. Oh, there's a blast. I go check the seismograph. Sure enough, there was the wiggle. Oh, yep, there's another one. So, you know, that's not an uncommon story. Most of the time, we don't get earthquakes in places where that's occurred. I haven't seen any earthquakes, for instance, from where they did this blasting that I was feeling. On the other hand, that swarm of earthquakes in 2015 down in Connecticut makes me think, boy, you know, it looks like that quarry somehow is related to that earthquake activity. So all I can say is, I don't know, maybe, but, you know, it's certainly worth some study on the part of people like myself.
So that leads me to the second part of my question, because we now know that this blasting took place, and we have an epicenter near where the blasting occurred. What activity should we refrain from doing to perhaps prevent maybe a major earthquake or other tremors or other seismic activity from taking place? Specifically, should we refrain from blasting until we have a better understanding as to what's going on under the earth around us?
On any given day, there is in summer day, I should say, in eastern Massachusetts, there are of the order of 5 to even 10 or 15 construction and quarry blasts. And they're all scattered all over. I mean, you know, we used to have a list of the quarries when I had staff working for me at Weston Observatory, and the blast would occur. We'd look at it, oh, it's that quarry. Sometimes they would even call us up. And we weren't seeing any earthquake activity. So I'm not sure I would do anything different based on what we know right now about the relationship of blasting and removal of rock and earthquakes.
Okay, so let's remove blasting from that question. We know we have an epicenter here based upon activity. What, if anything, should we refrain from doing that might prevent, or what should we refrain from doing because we don't want to cause any further seismic activity?
I'm not sure that there's anything. I mean, the school is built, right?
Right.
So you're not going to do more blasting for the school. You know, I'm not sure that there's anything that you should refrain from doing. And if the earthquakes stop and nothing else happens for 30 or 40 years, you're out of the clear. Sure. Or you're in the clear. You're out of the problem. But I don't know what's going to happen any more than you folks do.
Thank you.
So I think the mayor is going to come and close things here. But before we do, I want to say that I brought about, 10 or 15 copies of my book with me. So if any of you want to relieve yourselves of a $20 bill, you can purchase a copy of one of my books. If you don't want to do that or haven't brought the money or just curious, you can just go on Amazon and Google the book and order it there. But I think you'll learn quite a bit about the earthquake activity. And so with that, I can, oh yeah, definitely. I can write my name.
That's another $20.
I can write my name. So, I want to thank you for your attention. I want to thank you for the questions. I hope I've been able to, if not allay your fears, at least help you understand what I think you folks are dealing with here and indirectly what I'm dealing with in Weston. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mayor Bettencourt.
Yeah, one more round of applause for Dr. Ebel. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ebel, and thank you to Mr. Mannion, Ms. Tetch for being here today from MEMA as well. This is a city issue, and it's an important one. It's at the very top of the list of things we're dealing with here in the city. We are taking this as serious as we should be, because we know, as I've said a few times, this is very real. This is happening in our city. We need to be in communication. We need to be working together. Please, if another event were to occur, please reach out to the websites that Dr. Ebel mentioned, but also please reach out to City of Peabody. Let us know. We're going to be doing a couple of things based on this meeting. We're going to be putting together a pamphlet. I think that was an excellent suggestion, with some additional information beyond the phone numbers and things we wanted to be able to provide today. But I think we can give some more detailed information that will be very helpful. And also, we will be working on, and I know Fire Chief Daly is doing this, working on getting some portable seismic equipment here to try to really pin down this specific area. But this is something that's going to be a continuing issue for us, very likely, hopefully not. But let's stay in touch. If there's questions, please reach out to us. I can get some further information for some of our contacts out to all of you for specific questions. And we'll just continue to work on this as a team and as the city. So thank you for being here today. I think this was very helpful. I think Dr. Ebel answered a number of questions and able to provide information that's helpful. But it is still very much an issue for us here in our city. So thank you for your time today.